All right, hey guys, let's finish up chapter 1. All right, I ran out of time to put chapter 6 on the last recording, so this one's going to be rather short. So let's just dive right in. This class is following the AP curriculum. All right, in addition to the 4 big ideas that we just finished talking about, we will be using the other 7 AP practices in this class. We will be communicating with models or representations, using math appropriately, questioning scientifically, collecting data responsibly, analyzing and evaluating data, justifying conclusions and theories, and expanding understanding and connections. So, moving on, if the computer will let me. The process of science. Well, scientists use the scientific method, which is a standard series of steps used in gaining new knowledge through research. It can be divided up into 5 major steps. They are observation, hypothesis, predictions and experiments, data collection with statistical analysis, and conclusion. So here is a diagram to show you kind of how scientists use the scientific method. You'll notice that it is not a straightforward step 1, step 2, step 3. Depending on how the experiment goes, you may have to return to the beginning. You may have to go back a couple of steps. It's not a straightforward step 1, step 2, step 3. All right, there are lots of side roads, and it can take a while. So starting with observation, scientists use their senses to gather information about a phenomenon or natural event. Usually this is something that they find interesting, that they want to know more about. They then develop a hypothesis, which is a tentative explanation for what was observed. All right, an example is the discovery of the antibiotic penicillin. All right, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. It is developed through inductive reasoning and is testable. That is important. A hypothesis must be testable. All right, you can't have a non-testable hypothesis. It's against the definition of it. Then we move on to predictions and experiments. An experiment is a series of procedures designed to test that hypothesis. It utilizes deductive reasoning to make a prediction or an expected outcome. So if I were designing an experiment, I might want to see if salt water will kill my plant. Okay, I will then design an experiment. All right, my experimental variable or independent variable, the one that I am in control of, would be the amount of salt in the water. Okay, a good experimental design ensures that the scientist is examining the contribution of a specific factor called the experimental or independent variable to the observation. So my independent variable would be salt in the water. The experimental variable is the only factor that is being tested. I would then use a test group and expose it to the experimental variable. I would also have a control group that goes through all aspects of the experiment but is not exposed to the experimental or independent variable. So I'd have one plant that I water with tap water and one that I water with salt water. Okay, I would then collect data about whether the plant grew, how much it grew, or if it died. If the control and the test group show the same results, the hypothesis is not supported. So if my plant continued to grow at a normal rate, then I would reject my hypothesis. The data are the results of the experiment. That is what I actually measure. Okay, it should be observable and objective. All right, it shouldn't be my opinion. I should be able to collect some kind of data to show why I came to the conclusions that I came to. All right, that data can then be organized into tables and graphs. Okay, depending on the type of data, a graph might be most helpful. Usually it's easier to interpret a graph because it is very visual. The data is also analyzed using statistics. We find the standard error, so how far off of the average is the data, and we also use statistical significance to determine whether our data is statistically significant. And using those analyses, we determine whether our data was due to something that we did or chance alone. Here is a graph that may show data that is collected. All right, you'll notice that time is on the x-axis. Okay, this was data that was collected over a 4-week period. All right, the has a nice title. Okay, our units are labeled. That is important in a graph to know every little piece that you can from a graph. And then we come to our conclusion. The data are interpreted to determine whether the hypothesis is supported or not. If the prediction happens, the hypothesis is supported. If not, it's rejected. The findings are then reported in a scientific journal. Scientific peers will then review the findings, and other scientists will then attempt to duplicate the experiment or to dismiss the published findings. So if they do the experiment and they have tried their best and they cannot get the same results, then that experiment is dismissed. They're then published in scientific journals like Science, like New Scientist. All right, these are a few scientific journals here. The journal Nature is a very prestigious one. If you get published in Nature, you've hit the big time as a scientist. Moving on to theories and laws. Scientific theory. They are concepts that join together two or more well-supported and related hypotheses, and they are supported by a broad range of observations, experiments, and data. In pop culture, people will say, "Oh, I've got a theory about that." Well, they don't have a true scientific theory because they don't have a lot of data or observations to back up what they say. Okay? They don't have a true scientific theory. Scientific principle or law are widely accepted sets of theories, no serious challenges to validity. Okay? It's like the theory of gravity or the law of gravity. Okay? We all know that if I were to drop my phone off of this table, that it would fall. Okay? It's well accepted. No one is questioning gravity. So some big theories in biology. All right, there's the cell theory, which states that all organisms are composed of cells and new cells come only from pre-existing cells. The theory of homeostasis says that the internal environment of an organism stays relatively constant within a range that is protective of life. And the theory of evolution says that all living organisms have a common ancestor, but each is adapted to a particular way of life. These are theories in biology that are accepted because they are backed up by lots and lots of observations and data from many, many different sources that are very reliable. All right, so moving on to the scientific method. Okay, so we start with a hypothesis. This is just an example of an experiment. I don't think there's anything that you need to fill in on your notes, but I still want you to follow along and get a better understanding of the scientific method. So hypothesis. Newly discovered antibiotic B is a better treatment for ulcers than antibiotic A, which is in current use. So the scientist then designs an experiment. One control group includes subjects with ulcers who are untreated by antibiotics. Two test groups are subjects with ulcers who are treated with either antibiotic A or B, and you can see that over here in the diagram. Results and conclusion. All right, an endoscopy, a procedure that allows doctors to examine the throat, stomach, and upper small intestine, is performed on all subjects. The investigators then use statistics to determine the effectiveness of the various treatments. On the basis of the data, the investigators conclude that their hypothesis has been supported. All right, you can see they have graphed their data over here.